You want to automate all the stuff that your people don't need to do. I think the more we can automate things, I think honestly, the happier we'll be as practitioners in the space.
We found out ultimately that a device was compromised. Did we have any alerting to flag this anomalous spike? We were like, we did not. You know, my hands start sweating, my heart starts racing because now the stakes are higher. We don't have a lot of the technology that we should.
It's a different scale, different responsibility when you're actually trying to save human lives. I was thinking, what if I could do that one more thing? Like maybe it could make a difference.
So Chris, you're my brother. We've been working together for 3 years. And we always get along so great, but there's always been one thing we've never seen eye to eye on. So that's why I brought Lior in here so we could gang up on you and talk about security automation, because in my heart, I really believe that you can automate everything for security automation. But it seems like you have a little bit of a differing opinion. So Lior, I wanted to start with you. Let's keep Chris out of this. What is security automation? Can we automate everything for security operations?
It's a great question. And there are so many different pieces to the life cycle, right? Whether it's setting things up, having protections in place, and then monitoring and then responding. When it comes to collecting data, we can definitely automate that, right? And that's something that's been happening for years in the industry. There are other parts that are harder to automate, like decision making. And we're trying to apply a lot of different methods and tools to doing that. There's a lot of data that goes into it. Now, we're dealing with a landscape that's always in motion. So compared to classic automation for other fields, first of all, we're dealing with technology that's always changing.
Right.
So there's always new technologies, whether it's containers or serverless or autonomous vehicles or space, cybersecurity or protection of space technology. There's a lot in DEF CON that goes on around that. So that's one. And then the threat landscape is always changing. So whatever you do, there's always going to be somebody on the other end. They're going to automate their attacks as well.
Right.
So it's really hard to kind of call that problem solved. It's an ongoing thing, but there's definitely a lot we can automate.
I'm glad you brought Lior because I think you're going to need as much help as possible in this argument, because it seems like LinkedIn's on my side, right? We did a poll. We said, all right, you got 3 choices. Can we automate everything in security operations? Like end to end, like all you need maybe is somebody to just make sure the machine's running, but everything else is automated. The other choice was humans are essential, right? Automation can help, but humans are essential to cybersecurity operations. And the other one was not today, but in the future. Lior, you were in that camp. You were in the camp of like, maybe we need some processes, maybe we need some technology that we don't have yet, but in the future is a potentiality. I would say if I had to choose between whether we can do it today or do it in the future, I would say it's probably closer to being able to do it in the future. But definitely not at all today, because I do feel like you need a person to ultimately accept the risk or ultimately make a decision on whether to take a machine down, depending on whatever that vector is that you're dealing with. When you thought about the future, right? Obviously, you're thinking that in the future we can automate everything. What is keeping us from automating everything today?
That's an excellent question. If you look at different security processes, there's a pattern that emerges. There's some kind of trigger, something happens, whether it's an alert or there's some activity that needs to take place, and you collect the data that you need to make a decision. And over time, dealing with security automation, what I've found is that the collection is the easiest part to automate. We have APIs, and there's different maturity levels that tools have. The newer tools obviously have better APIs, so it's easier to collect data. And there's more structured data. And machines need structured data. Right? We do have technologies like natural language processing, but eventually you need to have that data. And then surprisingly, it's not chronological. So the next easiest step is to actually respond. So if you want to block 1 million IP addresses, great. If you want to block a set of hosts, great, you can automate that. It's that part in the middle, that analysis, that's where the context comes in, that's where the nuance comes in. And I've worked with analysts in the past and looked, at their work, and they kept blocking something, and then I asked them, why are you, I see you keep running the same action, and they said, yeah, it's the tool's not smart enough for me to be able to tell it every time you see this value, just get rid of it. Or the data is not there for me to be able to do that. I need to go into this other tool and pull that. So I think the first thing we need to do is make sure that our tools are interoperable, that we can instrument them. So we're building API first, and we're able to automate when we need to. The next part is the actual analysis. So we need to have platforms that are smart enough to be able to take in those insights and to be able to look at a lot of different data, right? So as we go up that, you could say a pyramid or the different levels of difficulty in automation, eventually we get to making actual decisions. And humans are able to look at logs and memory dumps and lots of data, but as you look at thousands and tens of thousands of incidents, you're able to actually learn this part actually matters most. Or if I look at this piece of data, that can help me, call the most false positives. And in machine learning, we call that feature selection.
Right.
So let's give it a lot of data and let's have it figure out where the information gain is, right? And then we can inform that collection as well. So I think that the first thing we need to do is definitely make the data collection and interoperability as good as possible and make sure that anything new that we build has that from day one.
Sounds like it's the connective tissue between data. Like, what is connecting data from this source to another source? And can these two sources talk to each other? Or do you need something in the middle to talk, from one source to another? And that connective tissue, it's almost like we already have that. If you were a startup, you're already going to have, many products in your security solutions or, your technology solutions as a whole that have APIs. I think that the connective tissue is already there. We just haven't connected it yet ourselves. Our security teams haven't connected it. We used to work together focusing on SOAR, and that's all we did. We automated process after process after process. It takes a while, but I do believe it can be done today as long as your sources have APIs. But if they don't, then it's just an iteration, working with your vendors, working with the solutions that you've built maybe, and adding APIs to them.
All right, so let's go into this sci-fi reality that you have that we can automate security operations.
Right.
Like, in your mind's eye, like, what does that look like for an organization?
It looks like humans doing the tasks that humans should be doing. If a machine can make a determination, allow it to make the determination. If a machine can detect, allow it to detect. If it can respond, allow it to respond. Why would we build the features in there if we don't allow them to actually be executed? Now, how we put these pieces together, that's the hard part. How do you make sure that the machines can detect like they're humans? How can you make sure that the machines are going to respond like them? I think it's through documentation. Writing out your steps, writing out your processes, and marrying that to what the machines can do. Maybe there's one step in there that a human has to do, like open up their computer, look at something, and send it to another person. But what if a machine can do that? Imagine, right, this thing called email. And we get all of these emails, and we all of a sudden start getting emails from random people that we don't know that say that we're related to a prince, and we should send them some money so we can get our royalties. We can get the inheritance of our royal families. Now imagine a world to where we don't have things that are automatically blocking that, automatically keeping that away from our eyes so we don't click it. When we get in the way of machines doing that job, things get chaotic. People start clicking emails, phishing links, and then we end up with a compromise or a breach.
But what if that automation flags an email as malicious or suspicious and it isn't? Would you give that machine the right to basically say rip it out of the organization? Or is there something you can add to it to make sure that it has the fidelity that we're comfortable with?
That is a great question. So has there ever been a situation where you've lost an email due to automatic blocking that you wish that you had?
Yeah, for sure.
There's a few times where something ends up in my spam folder.
Yeah.
And there's a clear place that I check to see if I didn't get something that I was expecting. And I think that's perfectly okay. That's part of the process. If you find something in the spam, you reclassify it and you allow the machine to learn. But if we say, all right, we didn't get an email, all of a sudden the machine is removed from the process, then that means the machine isn't gonna be an expert system. It's not gonna serve us if we don't reconfigure it whenever it has a mistake. That's what we do with our teams. We do that with humans. If the humans on our team make a mistake, we give them feedback. We allow them to grow and then allow them to do their job again.
Yeah, that's very true. It comes down to data again. It's when it's somebody who is trusted, you've had some conversations in the past, then the system knows that, right? When there isn't enough data, that's where the humans actually come in and add that nuance and that context, because machines, can't imagine to an extent. They can only rely on the data they have. And I'm glad you touched on that. We talked about technology and process, and the core of this whole question is actually the humans.
Right.
The key question is, are we building something that's completely autonomous, or are we building something that's more of a smart cockpit for a pilot, right? Where it can serve the person in the middle. And there's different models to do that too, right? So do you put a human in a position to look at alerts all day and then just click through and have the automation serve that process? Or do you have the autonomous system go through all that data, find the opportunities, and actually leverage that person's time in the best way possible, and actually call them and raise the data to them? Here's what I saw, here's what I think about it.
Right.
You should make the call on this one because it's too complicated. So we simply don't have enough people to be able to do that. Plus, going through alerts all day, hundreds and hundreds of alerts, nobody really wants to do that. And I think that's what we're probably going to see. We're going to see the work that our analysts and our engineers and everybody working in cybersecurity, the challenges that they're working on are going to be tougher and tougher because we're able to teach these machines, but it has to be maintained over time because, as I said, the technology is always changing and the threat landscape is always changing, and attackers automate all the time, as we know.
Right.
So we talk about automating everything in security operations. And I think you're right for the most part for today. For today.
I love it.
Yeah, and you said maybe in the future we could revisit it. I think you're right today for the most part. There are a few organizations that really pride themselves in automation and go for it all. Like I've seen some DevOps teams, they really go for everything. They want the full process to be self-service. They want the developers to just focus on the things that humans should be doing, maybe writing code, helping the machines do no-code processes so other people can do the same type of work that they do. From your experience, what have you seen to be the hang-up? Why isn't security operations fully automated today? It's
not automated today for a bunch of different reasons. Like you're talking about being in the cockpit, or sometimes I think of it as being like in that Iron Man suit, right? To enable you to do all the work, all the magic that you can in the cybersecurity space, but it's still you like making the decisions. Maybe there's some enrichment, right? I think automation's perfect for enrichment. I think a lot of your early projects were all about enrichment. Like, okay, getting data from here, bringing this data together so someone can make a determination. I still think there's a little bit of that happens on the front end. So if we go back to phishing, for example, let's say we're pulling from a source that's pretty decent at categorizing different identifiers like emails and IP addresses, but let's say the data is old, right? Are we gonna look into that additional context? And then at what point do we say, okay, here's enough of the story for someone to make a decision? Even at that point, as a human being, you can still be wrong. So if you give that to machines, they can be wrong too. Definitely. I really like the phishing example, but I think there's more, right? There's so much more to security operations. Like you have vulnerability management, you may have incident response. Incident response, don't even get me started, because that's tough. Why is that tough? So when you're doing incident response, it's not just machines that are just gonna be able to make those decisions, right? When you have, like, let's say you're doing like a Sev1 type of incident, right? Something that's really, really bad, you're gonna have to bring comms into the conversation, you're gonna have to bring in legal. You can't automate that. You actually have to talk to people and have people give buy-in.
Right.
That's just something, I think no matter what, no matter how advanced we get, we're not going to be able to automate that, even with the best AI that you could have.
So you're referring to the context giving, right? Like giving context about an incident?
I would say giving context and making decisions. So let's say you have somebody that's on the comms team, they're going to have to communicate potentially to the public about what data has been breached. You don't want to automate that.
Right.
Like, could you imagine like an automation that like immediately sends this like message out to the press that like, there's been a breach. All of this stuff has happened. All these accounts have been lost. And then no one in the company knew. If that just was automated all the way through, that company would be scrambling to figure out what the heck they're going to do to like fix this and like spin it in a way that doesn't shutter the business.
Yeah, there's that social intelligence that goes into it. Anywhere you need that nuance, you need to communicate with other people.
Mm-hmm.
But getting an IP address and blocking it somewhere else, that's machine to machine. We don't need people in that process. But that's where augmenting humans makes more sense, as you say. Anything threat can have a system that identifies IOCs, or you have some detection. It tells you it's this TTP in the attack matrix, and you can attribute it maybe to an actor, say 80% this is APT whoever, right? But understanding the culture of, is it block first or let it go first?
Mm-hmm.
Are you working in a power plant, in a chemical plant? Are you working in an online retailer where you don't want to lose business?
Right.
Can you take the risk to keep operating where data might leak or other critical systems might go down? So having systems understand that business risk is really difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't build once, use everywhere, because it varies from business to business and from organization to organization, right? So you really have to know the priorities and even be able to have that intelligent conversation with all stakeholders and even to the board of directors to understand, what the priorities are. And I think we've seen this in the public discourse around self-driving cars as well, right? When something happens, how do you make that decision? We always talk about the risks of automation. We need to look at the benefits. Like,
yes,
the car could brake much faster than I can, probably. So in a lot of cases, it would actually save lives where a human might make a mistake, or we can get distracted, or some tasks can be very boring, and we just get desensitized to risk over time, right? Especially when it's something we do every day, and then we don't have our guard up as much as the first time, right? So those are all benefits, but if we can intelligently tell the difference between scenarios and be able to raise that level of decision making to the human and say, I'm not really sure what I'm seeing here. I need the human context here. So as we tackle that problem space, try and, break off these low-hanging fruits of scenarios and, have the benefit of automation. And we should talk more about that, I think.
Right.
Highlight those situations where automation actually helped.
Right.
We'll allow a car to drive us, but we don't trust the machines that we built in security to drive us to success as well.
But let me ask a question. What is more difficult, or I'll say more complex? Driving a vehicle or running a security program?
What's more complex is a security program.
For sure.
And it doesn't have to be that way. Just imagine if you were driving a car and you had to do all the things that a machine is doing inside of the car.
Yeah.
Like hit the gas pedal, you have to turn the wheel very hard because we have power steering. The machine was already assisting us with that already. You have to turn the lights on and keep them on, like mentally. That's what we do in security. We keep checking alerts over and over again, even though there might not be anything that requires a response. I feel like that's almost like a wasted mental cycle. And when we're driving a car, there's so many tasks that we don't have to focus on. We just allow the car to do it.
Right.
And we build security solutions to do the same. We just don't trust them to do the driving.
Right. So I think that when you look at security operations, automation is super important. If you did everything manually, like it would waste everyone's time. No one would get anything done. You'd be reactive forever. But I think even like self-driving cars, right? We're not there yet. Like we're getting closer. I think we're building our confidence around self-driving cars, but we're not at a place yet where everyone's like, all right, let's hop in these cars and like, let's just let these cars drive us around for our day-to-day business. Now, take that by orders of magnitude more complicated. Like, let's say instead of like just being able to drive on regular streets, we now can go to space and like go to different planets. Now you increase the complexity of that to a degree where to get the data you would need to make decisions like that, it'd be astronomical. Like, I couldn't even imagine how much data you would need to be able to make decisions like that. I think that analogy is very similar to cybersecurity, right? We were talking about the scope and the expansion of technology and how complex things are changing. You get new technologies. All these things are changing all the time. That means that the models that we create, the automations we create are also going to have to change in step if we want to automate all of security operations.
My mom didn't actually know that I was going to be born with a birth defect. It used to bother me quite a bit.
She is just like you guys.
The message of control and complexity doesn't just apply to one subject in life. That is a universal truth. When a challenge feels too big, break it down to the parts that you can control.
What's the hardest thing to automate?
It's a difficult question. Answering that question, probably. So I think it's the decision-making, especially when there's nuanced context. So culture, social implications, business risk. So when there are a lot of different factors, you have to make a prioritization, right? And that's difficult even for humans. So even if you brought everybody together, they couldn't agree on it, right?
Right.
So I think that's really hard to automate. And then there's the general problem space of AI, right? We are trying to automate tougher and tougher problems. So there's computational limitations. And that goes back to what you said, Chris. The complexity of technology works against us because we have more attack surface and more things to automate and understand, new technologies. But it also works for us because it helps us create bigger machine learning models and get data faster. So if we have a ubiquitous network that's very fast and we can get the data to a central location, we don't have to make these localized decisions anymore. So that's one way in which it actually works for us as well. And we can keep creating these more intelligent security technologies. As technology platforms actually create new applications, just like smartphones created all these apps. And just because somebody created this platform, and version 1 of it might have been very simple and needs a lot of improvement. I don't know if either of you use the iPhone 1. It's by iterating and learning from your use cases and actually improving the platform, I think that's where we benefit. And then we're able to tackle these new challenges that we get.
Yeah, because you did say that eventually we can get to a place where we might be able to automate everything. Do you see a world in which there's basically no one in security operations and everything is just kind of running on its own?
As I said, that's a point in time because the threat landscape will change. So you need people who understand how to, upgrade those models, how to include new capabilities, how to keep up with technology. When there's a decision where a human is needed, they have to be able to interact with that system. So you may have an autonomous system that can do most of it, but there will be new things that come in. And that's also an important conversation to have with everyone who's in security operations today. And they're kind of thinking in this completely automated future, what is my place in this future? So I'm not going to be clicking on alerts all day, so what will I be doing? So we don't really pay or employ security analysts for their clicking ability. Or I know some people are really great at Python. Ron, I know you're a Python guy. So programming, we are in a shortage of programmers as well, but those are two different skill sets, right? So we pay analysts for their judgment, for their knowledge, their experience of what to do. Right? So that's where we need them. Anywhere where it's clicking, copy pasting, having 70 tabs open, we don't really need to keep doing. And I don't think people really want to do that. So as long as they understand that they're going to have new challenges, they're actually going to enjoy their job more, they're going to be part of building and keeping up with what's going on, because cybersecurity can never be a solved problem. As soon as we solve it, you have an adversary who's adaptable. So you lock the window, they try to come in through the chimney. They're adaptable and they'll try and use new techniques to attack. So
I think there's only one thing that you can't automate for security operations, and that's a process that you can't describe. So like you mentioned BizOps, for example, like BizOps being a part of security operations. I think there's a line to where security operations starts and stops. And sometimes information's passed to the security operations team from another team. And security operations will pass that to BizOps, for example. And then it's BizOps' responsibility to handle operations for the business. I think that's where the passover is from security operations. Security operations isn't really involved in sending out these messages to the press. It's another team.
Right.
So all of the operations activities like pulling in data, enriching that data, going to another tool and doing like the copying and pasting activities, I think that's really the core of security operations. And then we bring in other team members to help us assess the risk. They're ultimately the application owners. Someone built this application and may be making money for the organization. They should be the one to really come in and advise the security team to make a decision. Help our machines help you. And so you don't have to deal with that bit of information over and over again, and we don't have to tell the press negative news about being breached and compromised.
I 100% agree. However, in reality, a lot of times when someone's spinning up these war rooms, right, when you're handling an incident, it's generally the security team that's running that incident, right? They might not have all the context. They might not have all the answers. They might be talking to the data or the application owner or whatever it is, but they're helping sort of like walk them through, like, how do we figure out what's going on, right? So I still think that, even though I think you're right, it connects to maybe different processes. Maybe it's a comms process or a legal process. I still think that security operations, even up to that line, is still involved to a great degree.
With what?
With everything, right? Because if I'm an incident commander and I bring in everybody because we have a 7-1 incident, I'm still like going through my process of closing out the incident, right? Trying to figure it out. How do we stop the bleeding? Is there something that we need to report to somebody because we have legislation that says like, hey, if this happens, you need to let the public know? How do we let people know in the best possible way? How do we pull that story all the way together to give to the comms person to say, okay, this is the reality of what's going on? I don't think we as security operations, we can just say, all right, we spun up the room, everybody kind of like figure it out. I think in some cases, in some organizations, we might get there, like situations where security is federated, right? Everybody has a play in security and what they just kind of like, almost like a service, right? They supply everybody with everything they need and then everyone else. I mean, if you want to talk about like automating that way, I think that's much more possible, right? Because you still keep people in the process, but they're also contributing to security so the security doesn't have to do everything.
I agree. And when you look at it, security operations is building a story. It's building a story around something that may have happened or a policy that you want to implement. You need to educate your team. And if you look at it from an alert, security operations generating an alert, someone is going to look at it. Maybe a machine could help you out with that. But where I think security operations really excel at is the communications piece. Taking that story that the machine has built for you and then being the presenter of that story to another team. All of the operational pieces allow the machine to do that, allow the car to drive. You're the one that gets in and out of it and, you know, communicating or taking that data, and that story is supposed to take you somewhere and you allow the car to drive.
Yeah, I got something for both of y'all. And I think this is going to make it really clear.
Yes.
If we could automate security operations end to end today, why isn't there a vendor that's doing it? Like, imagine that. Imagine right here, right now, we just come up with the idea to automate everything from end to end, from identification all the way through closure, remediation, XYZ. If we came up with that idea right now, it would be the most valuable cybersecurity company of all time. True or false?
True.
But it doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist in what way exactly? Like what?
Right, there's not a company that's like, we automate security, period. Like, you don't need to hire anybody for security operations. You bring in our solution or solutions and we got you covered. We don't even need people on the back end because it's not a MSSP. We have everything automated, right? If you had a solution like that, what would be the value of that company? But because I haven't seen that company yet, I don't think it's quite possible.
I think there's several companies who are working on things like that. And there's a lot of pieces that go into it. Obviously, a lot of different data.
Right.
It's also a cultural shift. So even if you had that solution, working with customers to actually implement it, understand how to interact with it, it's a journey. We're working with existing technologies, right? Generally, as an industry, we're always walking in and there's something in place and we're trying to integrate with it and build on top of it. So you don't always get that opportunity to come in and say, I'm going to handle everything. Right? Especially when it's a large organization, there's something already in place. There's some existing investment, whether internal or with existing vendors. So that integration piece may be a necessary step in the journey to eventually getting to what you mentioned. And it's an engineering challenge and it's a cultural challenge. But I think we're going to get closer and closer to that.
Yeah.
So the question, as you said, will be who will get there or who will get closer over time. And I guess we'll see. I'm excited to see how far we can get. And we're always getting better and better AI and ML capabilities and faster networks. So we could probably get there at some point. And I'm definitely excited for that.
I think there are ways to automate security end to end, and some organizations are doing it, but they may not know. And there's one type of organization that I could think of, and that's an organization that's using a cloud provider, SaaS service, to really offload all of the security risks, or most of it at least, to someone else. After you have, let's say you're using one cloud provider, one SaaS application, let's say it's Salesforce. Everything that you do lives in Salesforce. If there's an update, it's in Salesforce. If there's a notification, it's in Salesforce. There's very few other elements that you have to protect at that point. As long as you are protecting the identity and the assets and the users, then what else is there to protect if they're only using a single or very few applications?
But even if you're using a SaaS application, there's still a shared data, shared ownership model, right? It'd be great if we could just say, hey, as long as we use this provider, we don't have to worry about it. If there's a breach, it's all on them. But I think for the most part, I think it's more of a shared thing that's going on. I mean, you look at things like vulnerability management with all the stuff that's been kind of going on in that space. And yeah, there's some ownership that's on the provider, but there's also ownership on the company that's utilizing them because they had to make the decision, for one, to use them. And in some cases, it's honestly the user error. It could be they did something wrong that made it easy for someone to access data that they shouldn't. But I do think that there is a little bit of shared. I do think it does make it easier in some regard if you have a vendor that's helping you with that stuff. But again, I still don't think we can wipe our hands clean just yet.
Right, I see what you're saying.
How involved do y'all want to be from a security operations perspective? So let's imagine for a second, you're thrown into a new organization. This happens all the time when we switch roles. We're thrown into a new organization, but this time we're leading the organization. Maybe you're the director or the CISO, and you're building out your security program and security operations. How involved do you want to be? Do you want to focus on all the alerts and all the response and all of the comm tasks that may be able to be done by a machine? Where are you going to focus your efforts and where are you going to allow it to be passed off to a machine?
Now, that's a great question. The classic quote is know yourself and know your enemy, right?
Right.
Classic. So when it comes to the threat, unless it's something highly proprietary, like in a military situation, mostly there's threat information that's out there and that can be shared, right? So there's these threat actors, they're targeting, let's say, all the airlines. We can share information and people are doing that. Your IT systems specifically, you probably know those better than somebody from the outside, but there's common components, right? The hardest part is the business processes, the priorities. Like if I asked you, what would you rather, lose, your billing systems or, your patient records? That really helps put things into perspective because, if billing goes down, you can bill later. But if you can't pull up the patient records, you're out of business. You cannot operate. And and it also depends, are you doing preventive care or are you doing emergency care? So you're the one who understands that business. And CISOs understand that they need to go and be part of the business and learn the business, and they're serving these stakeholders. We're also, as a cybersecurity organization, we're part of a bigger system, risk decision-making system. So if we're facing a risk due to a competitor or a natural disaster, then cybersecurity is, it's one chapter in that book. So sometimes the CEO will say, I know that we're facing an attack or there's this risk and you need a budget, but you have to understand this is a much bigger risk and I'm trying to deal with this right now. So I need you to kind of hold down the fort as best you can for the moment. And, you're the expert. I trust you. That's why you're the CISO. And we have these other things that are going on. When there's an alert that comes up or a decision that comes up, you need to make the decision. We mentioned the email that might get lost, right? It might be something even bigger than that, or maybe that email is something really critical. Mm-hmm. So if there's a system that's automated, I would definitely want to be involved in those decisions. Like, is this something that's really critical for the business? Is this something that we can block? So if you're blocking, say, an attachment and it's a slide deck from somebody really, really important who is coming to present to the board, you're going to get a phone call very quickly. That's one example, right?
Right.
So you need to understand the business priority. Everything that's threat-focused, I think it's easier to automate. I would personally like to be involved less in that side, because if it's very clear-cut that it's an attacker, I would prefer to just have it blocked and be notified on a dashboard. But when you need to make a decision on business priorities, I think that's where I would want to be involved in that scenario.
Right.
I love that you said know yourself, because obviously that's one of my favorite quotes as well. We use it quite often. And when you think about knowing yourself, sometimes automation can get in the way of knowing yourself, right? There are leaders, and I'm one of those camps that I kind of go back and forth, where you can get a solution that's black box. It knocks everything out of the park. Or you can go another route where you might get a lot of false positives and you have to do a lot of burn and churn and figure out what's good, what isn't, but you learn your environment better, right? So what do we do when the machines fail? When the machines fail, where does that line fit in for you all? Like, is it better to get everything automated and not have any knowledge of your environment? Or is it better you'll probably have to do some manual stuff, but at least the people that are doing the operations really understands the environment and can see what something is when something is either suspicious or malicious.
The manual work, like you're describing, is up front. You have to do that up front. There's no way to really get around it unless you don't want to hear the input of your other teams, your organization. If you don't want to hear their input, forget it. You don't need to go to them in the first place. But that wouldn't be an effective security program. We really want to work with our stakeholders. If you're not sure who they are, identify them, because you were hired for a reason to provide security for the organization. And the first goal is typically to assess your resources, right? Mm-hmm. Know thyself. What is critical? Can I have a billing system go down? Can I have patient records be lost, stolen, or inaccessible? As you start to work with other teams to find out this information, you build out the workflows. Hey, if this system were to go down, how do I notify you? What is the best way to give you a 911 call to respond to this system, because it's so critical for your team? And then you start to ask them, okay, well, what are the steps that you would take if this was a security event? Do you want me to block this automatically? Maybe they never want someone outside of a list of users to access the system or a set of IPs to access the system. It's just best to allow a machine to clip that and never allow that bad thing to happen in the first place. To really understand the requirement, design the security to fit the requirement, and then allow the security solution to do the work because you've built the requirement and found the solution for it. That would be my take on how to, walk that process, but still ensure that I'm putting automation first while understanding the business. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely agreed. I mean, as much as we strive to understand the business, the stakeholders are the experts, and they're the ones who own, that part of the business, and we need to, partner with them and understand if we're able to make more stringent controls around something or add more security monitoring around, which record should we pick or which system should we focus on? And by asking these questions, obviously, we wouldn't want either to happen, right? We want to protect all the records and have 100% uptime, and all those goals are important. But by asking these questions, we kind of focus the conversation, and that allows us to guide those stakeholders to actually give us the priorities. And then we know, okay, these are the crown jewels. Like if this happens and we are faced with that decision, and then we have to go and say, this is the decision we made, it's defensible, because we can say, we know that you care more about this. And so that's the decision we made. Or we're actually, when do you want us to bring you in? as a stakeholder, right? And what information do we need to collect so we can make the decision faster, right? So which part of this process is the slowest? How can we speed that up to reach the decision faster? So I actually became interested in cybersecurity when I was a teenager. I started to learn, programming, and then I thought about, what happens if you try and feed in these different inputs, and how can I make my program more reliable? I was born in Israel, and in Israel at 18, everybody goes and serves in the army, in the IDF. Obviously, there's not much I can say about my army service, right? But automation plays a big part. I think it's a culture, organizational culture of trying to automate, trying to make things more efficient, and it's a lot about the motivation too. So when you have that motivation, we need to make this more efficient. We need to respond faster. What if we find out something bad is going to happen, and we need to make sure that we're acting on it? That gives you that drive to always seek to improve. And I remember coming in like, oh, we could do this, we could do that. There's so much, we could create these programs. And then I come in and I'm like, okay, these guys are at a different level. Like there's a lot I could learn. I was this, excited kid, like, oh, there's so much you can contribute. And then it's like, okay, first, sit down, learn. And then once you understand how it works, then you get to contribute more. While I was there, I did my master's also in cybersecurity. And I got to do different projects, different roles. And I learned a lot. How do you defend networks? How do attackers think? And it's completely different from one person sitting in their basement somewhere hacking on a project. It's a different scale, different responsibility when you're actually trying to save human lives. And there's you're always thinking, what if I could do that one more thing? Like maybe it could make a difference, or maybe it could be better. Definitely plenty of times when I felt like I was the dumbest guy in the room. And I love that. So if that doesn't happen to me for a while, I need to find a different room. And then after, my government role, discharged, became a civilian, and I started consulting for several companies. And then a friend introduced me. He told me there's these two guys are starting a new company. I love them, worked with them in the past. You should go check it out. I'm like, okay. And that's how I met the guys at Demisto. And I got excited about, playbooks and automation and everything that we're doing. And I started consulting. And then at some point, they told me, come on, you're here 99% of the time anyway. Like, why don't you come on board full time and, take a role? And greatest decision, really, in my career. Demisto was all about automation. We had these great T-shirts that said, I find your lack of automation disturbing. It was all about automation, encouraging automation, figuring out how can you take a process and automate it using playbooks. And I've been a student of automation for probably going on a decade now, and seen it in different organizations. So yeah, it's played a huge part in my life.
I've worked on an incident where we found out ultimately that a device was compromised, but there was almost this process that we went through to find out that it was compromised. And we found out many other things. The first thing that we found out was this device that was compromised was being just brute forced by the internet. There was a lot of traffic going to this device. That was an anomaly. And as the incident went on, there was an incident commander. Hey, did we have any alerting to flag this anomalous spike? We were like, we did not. We continued with the investigation. Then we found out that the attacker was successful with brute forcing the device. They were able to log in. And then the incident commander asked us again, hey, do we have any alerting for suspicious logins? We didn't. Very embarrassing. My hands start sweating, my heart starts racing, because now the stakes are higher. We don't have a lot of the technology that we should. Right. And as we went on further and further to try to remediate this access, we found out that we had no way to re-image the device. So we had to just try to figure out ways to get the attacker off the device, because this device had to stay online. We had no way to rebuild it. So we're going through these processes that if we had automation to bring this information to us, we could have passed it to the right person. We could have said, hey, application owner, is this anomalous spike in traffic? Is this bad? Should we block it? If there's an anomalous spike that never happens, let's just block it to be safe. If it's 4,000 requests, there's no CEO, stakeholder that is up in the middle of the night doing 4,000 requests to a critical resource. We should just block it. The second bit was the suspicious activity. It was coming from an IP that's never logged into this device as well. That is something that maybe teams should be a bit more sensitive on. Maybe I don't want to just block all the access, but when you have these indicators and they start to line up and tell the story speaks for itself. This is bad activity. Let's not let it happen. We need to just block this traffic. Have y'all ever found yourself in a situation where the cards are just stacked against you and it's like, if I had solutions that I didn't have to watch, manage, maybe I would have been successful. Maybe this incident wouldn't have happened and things would have been different.
Yeah, I would say the more context you can get for your environment or any activity that's going on in your network, I think the easier it's going to be for you to make a determination. You still have to make that determination as the human in that process. But honestly, I think that's why as cybersecurity practitioners, we tend to be very reactive because we're trying to get to this like utopia of like automation where everything is kind of like consolidated for us so we can make decisions. When you ask the question about how much automation would you want to see out of your program, I think as much as possible, right? You want as much context, as much information as possible, and you want to automate all the stuff that your people don't need to do because everyone's burnt out. Like burnout is very real in cybersecurity. And if you could get to the point where all the very basic stuff is automated, you can have people really focus on threat hunting. You can have them purple teaming, just doing the things that only humans can really do at this point. And honestly, that would make for a much more fulfilling job. If you have someone that's copying, pasting from spreadsheet to spreadsheet during an incident or investigation, like I think you're missing the boat. But I think the more we can automate things, I think honestly, the happier we'll be as practitioners in the space.
You know what's funny to reflect on is why I got into cybersecurity in the first place. I got into this space because I wanted to catch hackers. I wanted to catch bad guys. I wanted to learn how they do it. I wanted to know how to do it myself as well. But my goal was to catch them. But over time, something went wrong. I found myself looking at data and just really being an inspector of data. Does this data look normal or does it look anomalous? Does this look normal or does it look different? Over time, I started to realize that I actually lost why I first got into the space because I got into the rat race of looking at alerts, responding to incidents, and really fixing up the things that the organization should really be focused on in the first place. I think when you look at why security practitioners join security in the first place, it's never to really do these manual activities, copying and pasting from another tool, sending comms out to just have someone else do the work. You're giving them a notification. You're a glorified notification system at that point. We didn't join cybersecurity for those reasons. When y'all reflect back and think why you joined cybersecurity, does the day-to-day line up to what you do today?
In any endeavor, you have to be connected with your mission, right? And as like you said, we're on the day-to-day, there's some software bugs, there's tickets, and you lose that connection. And every now and then you have to kind of refresh that connection, make sure that that's why meeting the stakeholders is so important as well, because you're serving somebody, right? You're serving a community. So even when you're building tooling, right? If you work at a vendor or you're the DevOps, you're serving somebody and you're able to build something that's, it's not economical for them to build individually, right? So we mentioned all of these connectors. If only I had this piece of data. If everybody had to build that for themselves, it just wouldn't work out. And then you have to maintain it. So oftentimes, the teams are really smart. They could probably build it, but it just doesn't make sense for everybody to rebuild the same thing, right? How do we figure out to centralize that and just have the core and the platform built by a single team, and then you can pay the vendor to, keep it up to date. So when you're building that platform, you're also serving a community of people who are trying to defend their organizations. And when they're trying to do that, you're serving them. It's really important to keep that mission in mind, and especially when human lives are at stake, whether it's in a hospital or it's a power plant. It's a hugely impactful mission, and it really helps motivate you when you're serving that community and connected with your mission.
Mm-hmm. When you think about your mission, you think about the thing that you wanted to do when you first got into cybersecurity. just like you, I wanted to be a hacker, right? As soon as I was like, okay, let's figure out this hacking stuff. But fate would have different plans for me and went a completely different route. And I would say right now, what really gets me jazzed about cybersecurity is seeing really well-run programs. Like that's what gets me out of bed today. Like I love people just pushing that envelope, getting better and better each and every day. And I know both of you two have seen a lot of environments. You probably seen more environments than me due to the automation stuff you did at your other company. Have you seen an organization, you don't have to say who it is, but have you seen an organization that got really close to automating everything in security operations?
So I've seen organizations that have a lot of it automated. As I said, things keep popping up. You also need the resources to be able to get to everything. That's why, as I said, it's a journey. There's a lot that needs still to be done by the vendors, and to have those capabilities. There's a lot that needs to be done around understanding the business and incorporating that. And the threat intel programs are always running. There's always more information on that front, right? But I've definitely seen teams that have gone very far in their automation journey, and they can point to 10, 15 things and say, yeah, we used to do this manually, but now this is being taken care of. And, our time to remediate has shrunk by a lot. And we're actually able, and, I used to do this job, now I do this. Or I took up coding, or I learned this system because now I'm automating. So I've seen organizations go very, very far in that journey.
I've seen organizations focus on automation engineering. So you can almost imagine you drop a puck into this maze, and as it flows down the maze, it might take a different path, and it ultimately makes its way into a single bucket. I've seen organizations really take that type of approach to where they build playbooks or expert systems to guide the data, guide the enrichment, guide the security operation process to the point to where they're not sure as to what should happen next. In some situations, you could be very confident. To spot a phishing email, it's very straightforward. They use these bits of information that are seemingly obvious and automate that. And then when something isn't as obvious, they do the documentation, they do the research, they ask themselves about their organization and the threat, and put automation there and allow the data and that story to be flown down a specific path. So that's what I've seen is really focus on automation engineering. I know that some organizations call it detection engineering when they just focus on automating all the detection efforts, and even response engineering where you focus on automating as much of the response process as possible. But when you combine those two together, it's just good old-fashioned automation engineering.
Right. I think there's different types of security practitioners. We're all, protectors. We're all trying to defend something. There are those who are more engineers. They like to build things. They like to make them more efficient. And then there are detectives. So there are those of us, we see a problem, we see all the data, and we want to find the truth, right? So we want to find out what happened, and we want to dig into this data and find the truth. And when those two people work together, that's when you build really amazing things, because the detectives know what to build, and then the engineer can get it done the right way. And I think that's the dynamic that we need to foster in those teams.
We know security automation would be so great for every team to have if it was there for us. We would rely on it more and more if it was helpful. But we said that state is in the future. So what does that future look like? What is the future of automating as much as possible? What are the things that we would automate there?
One thing we can say for sure is that copying information across systems is gone, right? So all of your data and your systems are interoperating. Anything that's a clear-cut decision is made immediately, so you don't need people for that. The people who are working in security automations and security operation need to work together with that system, and they're having decisions presented to them. So rather than you trying to drive the system and have it automate certain processes, it's going to take in all the data, go through the security operations processes, and essentially call you. So now the machine is working for you. And one of the goals that we have in security operations is time to remediate, right? Let's get the decision as quickly as possible. Let's block it and make sure it's not causing more damage, especially if there's a breach already in progress. Maybe you're stepping on the field and things are already in play. But one thing we need to optimize for is human time. So we need to actually make the best use of our experts' time and make sure that we're not wasting, that precious resource. So how do we have, our security experts inform the system as we build it, and how do we have our experts make the decisions where we need them to actually be involved, and how do we measure that, right? So to make sure that our time is being utilized properly.
Even in the future, we still need people, we still need experts to do security. We might be able to get to a point where we might be able to automate 90% of the remedial, boring, repetitive stuff. But, the people are afraid that if we bring in the robots, we bring in the machines, that they're going to lose their jobs. I don't think that's the case at all. I think what we're going to get to is a place where a lot of the stuff that people don't need to be doing, like you're saying, machines are going to do it for us. But we're going to be able to do the fun stuff, the investigations. We're going to do some of the hypotheses from a hunt perspective. We're still going to do things like threat intelligence, because threat intelligence, you have assessments, right? It's a confidence level. You're pulling together data, and you might not have all the data there to make a decision if you were going to give it to a machine. But if you give it to a person, they can make those assumptions. They can take those educated guesses in order to move the program forward. So I think in the future, the more into automation we go, the better we're going to be as a program, as a community. But I do think that we're still going to be a permanent fixture in security operations.
Yeah, I think especially in those edge cases where you need that human expertise, you need that nuance, you need to understand the business and not just, what a file is doing. We definitely need humans involved there. They're just going to be used more selectively, right? So we're going to be more efficient with people's time. And that's why we are missing so many people in cybersecurity, where there's so many open positions, because I don't think we're utilizing the people intelligently enough, right? The tasks that they're doing. And then, as I mentioned, the people building the automation and creating, informing that system need to be experts as well. So I think that's probably going to be the focus for cybersecurity people. It's not that just we're going to have a system that's complete Skynet and it's going to inform itself and learn by itself. I don't see that happening anytime soon.
Right.
So there's definitely a place for people, and I think there's going to be a great opportunity in learning more and more cybersecurity skills and shifting to the tasks that require more of that human judgment and nuance.
Mm-hmm. When you think about your answer from before, right, and then keeping in mind everything that we've been talking about today, is your answer still the same? We're not able to automate 100% today, but in the future, is that still your same sentiment, or has it changed?
It's an ever-shrinking part of the overall picture, right? So as we said, you can automate collection, you can automate the response. As new technologies come on board, we always have to keep developing that to make sure that you can instrument those systems. And then the analysis portion and decision-making, as a society, we're all exploring what kind of artificial intelligence can we create? Should it emulate humans? Should it be something completely different? So that's a bigger question than cybersecurity alone, right? But I think we're providing more and more resources to that endeavor of actually automating cybersecurity. And as we do that, it's going to be an ever-shrinking part. I think that's where that user experience and human-machine interaction, it's called in academia, is increasingly important. And we're trying to create new ways for the machine to serve the human, rather than you going through and having to click a million buttons and find things in menus. Right. I think we need to move past that.
Yeah. What about you, Ron? This is it, the moment of truth. Has anything changed for you during this conversation?
There's been a lot of insight. I feel like you two have really helped me see your perspective. It sounds like we're all saying the same thing. It can be automated today, but it won't be. There's a lot of elements that we just need humans for. There's, the communications aspect. There's the storytelling aspect of getting the right story and getting that story to the right person so they make the right response actions. And getting the machines to work together. That's been one of the biggest struggles of security automation today, is finding out that one technology doesn't have all of the API calls that you need. There's this one feature that would save the day, but it's not available yet, says the vendor. Always devastating.
Always on the roadmap, though.
In the future, though, I could see an environment to where security is architected with the business. We architect the business, we create a business plan, a strategy, a vision, and protecting those critical elements, whether it's PII, that personally identifiable information, or even your applications. We don't think about that when we're building out our business, but I think that's where security architects, security automation engineers can help out with, is helping architect that security strategy so it's really married with the business. And then the machines will be able to do their job.
So it sounds like I won by a landslide. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time. No, I'm just kidding. When we have these discussions, we end up meeting in the middle, right? Because there are definitely good ideas on one side or another, whether you're talking about technology, cybersecurity, automation. But I do think that there is a blend between the two. We need automation, right, to keep our people focused on what's important, to make the right decisions. But at the end of the day, we're always going to need that human interaction, that human component to making decisions in this great thing we call cybersecurity. And I say with that, thanks for the time. Thanks for the conversation. Let's cheers it up.
To automation.
To automation.
Nation.